Hi, I'm Abby, I have a lot of feathers, and this is Vinyl Monday. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the series where once a week I sit down and just talk about a classic album I love. If 30-minute episodes aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, and on TikTok. Today is a special Monday. This is our first episode of this year's Sagittarius season. Welcome, everybody. From biting the head off a bat to any number of things this guy has done, screaming a 12-letter word you can't say on the radio at the top of your lungs at the top of every single show, to lighting a guitar on fire. Sagittarius season is for being your most unhinged self. Sagittarius men, I will forever be chasing after you with the bail money in my pocket, a fire extinguisher in one hand, and a rabies shot in the other. Today happens to be our man of the hour's 81st birthday. I don't think I've celebrated a birthday on the day on this show yet. This is the last record from this group I have to do. I even reduxed their first record before getting to this one. This week's album is the Jimi Hendrix Experience, Axis Bold as Love. Congrats to those who guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. That's where I post my hints to what next week's album is gonna be. I host polls over there, so you can sometimes pick what comes next. You can find all of that on my channel. Alright, let's turn this thing around and take the plastic off. So my copy is, well, I have 3 copies. This was my first, a US repress from '68. This was a Christmas gift from a boyfriend I had once upon a time. He lived in LA. There are so many amazing record stores out there. I think this was from the Permanent Records Roadhouse. Or maybe this was my second and this was the first? I honestly don't remember. Whichever my second one was, that is a repress from 1976. This is the trouble of having multiple really similar copies of an album. This one, my third copy, is different though. This is from 2015 and it's in mono. Yeah, I guess Hendrix in mono is like a flaming hot take or something. I never would have known this had I not casually mentioned in the Are You Experienced episode that, you know, maybe you might want to check this out in mono. That's the trouble with these 60s psych albums. They were meant to be in stereo, but stereo technology was so primitive at the time that it really doesn't do the material much justice. But enough about the nerdy stuff, right? Let's talk about the fun stuff. So our birthday boy had horrible luck with album covers. As epic as the Electric Ladyland Naked Lady cover gaffe was, I can't show you the front for obvious reasons, Axis might just take the cake. So when asked what he wanted for the cover, Jimmy said he wanted something that would spotlight his Indian heritage. So Roger drew up this cover based on a mass-produced poster of Hindu god Vishnu. If you're not familiar with Hinduism, haven't read the Gita or the bigger text that the Gita came from, there's creation, stasis, and my personal favorite, destruction. Vishnu is the sustainer god. He's got blue skin and infinite physical forms, including the god Krishna. He's got lots of arms that hold weapons, staffs, flowers, and snakes. Psychedelia was deeply connected with Eastern culture. It started with the instruments, then the fashions, and naturally branched out into philosophy and religion. If you were a hippie in the 60s, chances are you either had this Vishnu poster or knew somebody who had it. However, Jimmy did not mean he was this Indian. He was this Indian, Native American, First Nations, all of the above, not Indian. This is one of the biggest miscommunications in all of rock and roll history. When Jimmy saw this cover, He was pissed. He found it distasteful that him and his bandmates' faces would be superimposed on imagery like this, and made several statements distancing the band from this choice. Just a blunder of epic proportions. But as unfortunate as it is, this cover goes so unbelievably hard. This is beautiful. The pinks and oranges with bright blue, the guys matching afros circling their faces like black halos, the addition of the cobras, sick as hell. I had this cover as a poster in one of my college apartments. It hung on the back of my bedroom door, and now I have a mural painted on my closet inspired by this art. Blue on the bottom and a pink and orange sunrise on top. The inside of this gatefold was designed by David King. We have lyrics to all the songs and a transcript of EXP. On Axis, bold as love, we of course have our birthday boy, the legendary Mr. Jimi Hendrix. On vocals, the voice of Paul Caruso on EXP, piano, recorder, and glockenspiel. Rounding out the experience, we have my favorite of the group, Noel Redding, on 4 and 8-string bass, as well as lead vocals on She's So Fine, and we can't forget Mitch Mitchell on drums and serving as the interviewer on EXP. Special guests include Trevor Burton and Roy Wood of The Move. They provide backing vocals for You Got Me Floating, along with Graham freaking Nash. Axis was produced by Chaz Chandler, engineered by Eddie Kramer, and working underneath them are some more familiar faces to this series: Andy Johns, George Chikantz, and Terry Brown. Roll a very feathery transition. So our story today begins before our previous story ended. Producer Chaz Chandler held most of the creative control on Are You Experienced? He prioritized 2 to 3 minute potential radio hits. Jimmy had some ideas, but at the end of the day, Chaz had the final word. Through Are You Experienced, Jimmy had formulated an artistic point of view. He learned a lot about production and mixing. According to Noel, we relied on Jimmy's irrepressible urge to experiment with guitar sounds. He did so with a vengeance. Some of the sounds Jimmy wanted to make were way ahead of technology at the time, so he gets buddy-buddy with this engineer, Roger Mayer. Roger made some of the earliest fuzz boxes for a couple Yardbirds, Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page. Now he was building special equipment for Hendrix, like the Octavia pedal. Meanwhile, Eddie Kramer is experimenting with this new thing called flanging. Like I said, stereo was the hot new thing in '67. Psych rockers loved it because you could do all these wacky effects after recording. Chaz was happy to indulge Jimmy and Eddie's wants to add overdubbing and lots of intricate effects, but he wasn't so much a fan of the uber perfectionism. See, 17 takes of Cat talking to me, only to decide take 2 was the best, only to not include this song on the album at all. With every take they did, Chaz just saw the price tag going up and up. Remember, somebody's gotta pay for the studio time here. And then you have Noel, who is terribly bored. He'd lay down his parts either at the very beginning of the day or the very end. So while Jimmy was doing all of his mess, Noel would peace out to the pub across the street until he was needed again. Initial sessions for Axis took place in May and June of '67, just before and after their appearance at Monterey Pop. Yes, Axis began before Are You Experienced was even out. The first songs cut are She's So Fine and this 2-part song with the working title Symphony of Experience in May. The guys also fucked around and bashed their guitars into amps. Cue the smash success of Are You Experienced in the States, and to think, if Jimmy hadn't set his guitar on fire at Monterey, this might not have been released in America at all. Thank you, Paul McCartney, for getting the experience on the bill. By October October, the symphony was retitled to If 6 Was 9, and some lyrics from Ben E. King's Stand By Me were written in. It was recorded in 2 parts. Part 1 is the first 90 seconds, and part 2 is everything else. That silence is where the 2 tapes were spliced together. Most of Axis was cut in 16 days, with October 4th being a particularly busy one. Ain't No Telling, Bold As Love, and You Got Me Floating were all worked on that day. Noel's buddies Graham Nash, Roy Wood, and Trevor Burton all stopped by to do backing vocals and foot stomps. So that means If 6 Was 9 was also worked on the 4th. Amidst the chaos of like 7 people in the booth at a time, nobody bothered to write down who played the tambourine or the music box. This doesn't surprise me personally. Experience sessions were a revolving door. The guys spent October sleeping during the day, playing gigs in the evenings, then heading right to the studio to work for the rest of the night. And these weren't little club gigs they'd be coming from. No, this was big stuff. Starting with Top Gear on the 6th, Jimmy and Noel jammed with Stevie Wonder while Mitch was taking a piss. TV appearance in France the week of the 9th. There's this awesome photo of the experience backstage with a bunch of groups, including Syd Barrett's Pink Floyd. Roger looks angry, Jimmy was not ready for the photo, and Rick looks like he's asleep on his feet. Jimmy filled in for Mick Taylor for a Blues Breakers gig, attended the premiere of How I Won the War the very next night, and we can't forget the gig at the Marquee on the 24th. The night ended with Jimmy and Noel in a play sword fight with their guitars. They got a little too into it. Jimmy tripped and fell into Noel. Wait Until Tomorrow and Spanish Castle Magic were completed on the 30th, and they're the final 2 songs completed for the album for about 12 hours. Now, I'm all for artists owning their masters. Artists should absolutely own the rights to the recordings they make. However, I'm not for everyone just physically handling them. That night, Jimmy lost the masters to the entirety of side 1. How the hell do you manage that? Okay, so we're not totally sure what happened, but here's what we do know. Chaz and Jimmy lived together at the time and would bring the tapes home from the studio for safekeeping. Jimmy was really excited about this record, so from here, he would take the masters to parties to play them for his friends, before a safety master could be made. This is why you have safety masters, people! Whether it was going home from Olympic or from one of these parties, we may never know for sure, but Jimmy left side 1 in the back seat of a taxi, never to be seen again. Seriously, it's almost impressive how thoroughly Jimmy screwed this thing and how late in the process he managed to do it. So the next night, Halloween night funny enough, probably after giving Jimmy the dressing down of his life, Chaz and Eddie pull an epic all-nighter to recreate side 1. 6 of the 7 tracks were able to be reconstructed, which is a miracle in and of itself. There was one track that couldn't be saved. If 6 Was 9. But in comes Noel Redding to save the day? Turns out that sometime back in June, while Jimmy was probably doing 30-something takes of whatever the fuck, Noel used his free time to make a copy of the rough mix of If 6 Was 9. He wasn't very careful with the tape, though. He got it tangled, but the guys are like, fuck it, this is literally all we've got, and we're gonna salvage it. With an iron. They smoothed out the wrinkles in Noel's tape with an iron so it would run through the equipment. You can't make this up! And that's how weeks of hard work were rebuilt in just 11 hours. That's right. The Experience made their November 1st deadline by the skin on their teeth. The track listing for Axis Bold As Love goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have a little skit called EXP, followed by Up From the Skies. Then Spanish Castle Magic. Next, Wait Until Tomorrow. Ain't No Telling, Little Wing, and side 1 closes out with If 6 Was 9. Opening up side 2, we have You Got Me Floatin', followed by Castles Made of Sand. Then She's So Fine. Next, One Rainy Wish, Little Miss Lover, and the album closes with Bold as Love. Axis was released December 1st, 1967 in the UK, just a few months after Are You Experienced? The US gets this a few weeks later in February of 68. Jimmy does this hilarious promo shoot where he's dressed as Santa Claus. If he climbed down my chimney at night, I'd be more afraid of him stealing my stash box than my milk and cookies. There was one song worked on during Axis production that I didn't mention. During that May session, Jimmy stumbled on this harpsichord Olympic kept in storage. He wrote Burning of the Midnight Lamp on that harpsichord and made a demo recording. While the guys were in California for Monterey Pop, they dash over to Houston studios in LA to record it, but no one was really happy with it. Chaz said Houston was, and I quote, prehistoric compared to Olympic. The guys shelved this song for the time being, saving it for what would become Electric Ladyland. I really enjoyed the creation of Axis, said Noel. We felt positive and reasonably relaxed during the sessions, even though it was made plain that at least 3 record companies were drumming their fingers, anxiously awaiting the product. Mitch concurred, saying that even though things moved very quickly, recording felt less rushed and more relaxed. So, what do I think of Axis? Going in, this is one of the hardest albums I have ever had to review, because I truly heard something different every time I listened. There came a point about 6 days in where I just had to put it down because I knew I'd never fully break this thing down. I've grown to love Ladyland over the time I've been doing this, and in the time I've been doing this, I haven't really had the time to revisit Axis. It was my favorite Hendrix album for a solid minute, and now I remember why. To begin with, the loss of the masters is glaringly apparent if you hear If 6 Was 9, the song that unfortunately suffered the most from Jimmy's little oopsie, and You Got Me Floating back to back on a format like CD or maybe a streaming service. At least with vinyl, you get the benefit of that break between both sides and it's a little less noticeable. But since I'm not a pretentious fuck, the fidelity issues really don't affect my enjoyment of this material. In fact, I am blown away that Axis was recorded on 4-track. This stuff really pushed the limitations of technology available at the time. Shout out to Chaz and Eddie for achieving this intricacy on relatively primitive equipment. It's shocking that they achieved this clarity considering everything that happened to the tapes, from taxi rides to clothes irons. I can actually hear everybody play. I dig Are You Experienced, and I love Electric Ladyland, but it's hard to pick out what's what at times. Jimmy thrived in this soundscape. This is the first album where he treated his material like his playground. He fully embraced pedals, was playing stuff backwards, and was layering a lot. Axis is a Jimmy rhythm album. These songs place more of an emphasis on the riff than Are You Experienced did. Jimmy was, and still is, such a fascinating player because his soloing was very fluid, right? The man rarely lingered on one note for too long. But his riffs were on the rigid end of the spectrum. He had a totally different approach to both elements of guitar playing, and it's really cool to listen to. His style was so dynamic in a way that not a lot of people recognize, and Axis spotlights that. Also, Axis is the Experience album to be a Noel Redding girly. Hear me out, man. I always go for the weirdo of the band. It definitely helps if the weirdo has big hair. Miss Pamela knew what was up. Cynthia Plastercaster knew what was up. And now I know what's up. Axis was Noel's aha moment. I know it's popular to single him out as the weak link of the experience, but he really wasn't. There wasn't a weak link, and that's why this band is special. It takes a serious player to hold his own with the greatest guitarist to ever live and the second greatest drummer to ever live. Sorry, Mitch, nobody's better than Elvin Jones. Noel was the much needed grounding force to hold things down underneath Mitch and Jimmy doing all of that. The trouble with the other power trio of the day, Cream, was that they didn't have a ground wire. If you listen to Disraeli Gear's Wheels of Fire, their stuff live, they couldn't always link up onto one wavelength. The Experience never had this issue. Axis's two biggest weaknesses. One, Jimmy hadn't quite come into his own as a lyricist. We wouldn't see this until Ladyland. And two, some of these songs feel half-baked. They fade out just 30 seconds too early, Ain't No Telling and Little Miss Lover are where this is most apparent. Flaws aside, there are some brilliant moments here. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? When I compare this with the other Experience album openers, Purple Haze and the Gods Made Love / Have You Been, Axis is the weakest of the bunch in the sense that it doesn't have much of a statement of intent. Purple Haze, 3-minute banger, that's what Are You Experienced is. Have You Been is the prelude to this expansive, sprawling thing, and that's Ladyland. EXP and Up From the Skies are oddly subdued for what's to come. It's an unstable opening. The winding up and slowing down of Mitch and Jimmy's voices is funny though. I like that the guys had some fun with EXP. Then Up From the Sky is this jazzy swing, almost airy, with Jimmy's breathy vocals and Mitch using a brush on the drums. Things really kick into gear with Spanish Castle Magic. Jimmy wrote this one about one of his favorite clubs, but you'd never know this was a real place. He makes it sound like Shangri-La in the sky. This song is so fucking good. So good that I can't be articulate about it. Jimmy was a legendary soloist, but this is a best ever Jimmy riff, my favorite of his for sure. Everybody's playing that melody through the chorus, even the drumming is melodic. It's such a good riff that the guys can't help but ride with it. This was the song that made me realize the power of this rhythm section. Noel is kicking ass on this 8-string, sliding down his fretboard, drags the momentum back. Mitch's rolls are razor sharp. I love the tone he got on this snare. Wait Until Tomorrow is a little shoulder shaker about the classic tale of forbidden teenage romance ends bad. Songs like this put Jimmy's charisma on full display. That psych rock, half talk, half sing thing can get a little grating if it's not authentic to the singer. Jimmy made it so cool, especially click bang, what a hang, your daddy just shot for me. This is the chillest, flirtiest murder ever. The high falsetto backing vocals being the girl in the song gave me a laugh. And the subtle Jimmy rhythm that isn't a riff. It uses the sweeter, richer end of his tone to do this very fluid, harmonic noodling. Ain't No Telling is a quick one. I could imagine this moving the crowd at a club. It's good for pacing, but it's otherwise filler. Very catchy filler. Hey no! But still filler. Then, Little Wing. Jimmy wrote this song about a girl he really liked but just couldn't commit to. It's the crown jewel of this record, really, and tragically short. It's light as a feather, and so sweet. The glockenspiel trickles across like dewdrops on a petal. These are some of Jimmy's best lyrics for how minimal and impressionistic they are. His crush is as lovely as butterflies and zebras and rubies and her fairy tales. Yet there's this inherent melancholy. When I'm sad, she comes to me. With 1,000 smiles, she gives to me free. It's all right, she says. Take anything you want from me. There's sorrow in this selflessness. And that's something that happens with being a groupie. You're throwing your heart around left and right, really throwing your love into making this band work. You're helping them load up equipment, you're making their clothes, you're feeding them after the show, you're spending all your time with them. It can be so hard to be that selfless and not get attached. But it's all for the love of the music, right? Stevie Ray Vaughan and Derek and the Dominoes covers both tap into that sorrow. The latter is one of my favorite tunes ever recorded, but you can't beat the original's watery, rich solo run through this tiny little Leslie amp. It's one of the best Jimi ever played. It's the perfect balance between rigid and fluid. And I don't know what it is, but his little ad-lib at the end made me tear up one night. On to the miracle song, as I've taken to calling it, If 6 Was 9. This is intoxicating, trippy magic. From the first stop time, you know this is gonna be something special. The first time I listened through this album, I was... oh my god, this is so uncool. I was baking banana bread, and I had to stop adding the chocolate chips because I got chills. If Little Wing was Jimi at his gentlest, then this is roughest in more ways than just the mix. You can kind of tell this is not what the guys intended. These jagged guitars cut through the smooth cymbal. Stomping marks the uneven procession of time. It makes me feel like I'm being dragged backwards while the universe expands before me. This song is Jimi saying, if the world turns upside down tomorrow, I'll be fine because I have self-efficacy and self-assurance. I get goosebumps at white-collar conservatives flashing down the street, pointing their plastic finger at me. They're hoping soon my kind will drop and die, but I'm gonna wave my freak flag high. The hippie movement did die, but this youthful defiance must have been so exciting to live through. This song does kinda spin out of control in the second half. See Jimi's recorder solo, if you can even call it that. But the way each guy weaves in and out of what the other is doing, these wily guitar solos through the second half, the subtle bass solo in the first, the texture of Mitch's fills throughout, that's the experience at their best. You Got Me Floating is a more straightforward rocker. I used to let this one pass by, but now it's one of my favorites. The way the guitar and the bass lock together through that chorus. No one in this band was too attached to melody or harmony. They switch out effortlessly. The lyrics could have been better. You got me floating, float to please. This is where panning does get a little ridiculous, if that's something that bothers you. But it's okay. Jimi's strumming is a much needed structure. And his backwards shit is just ridiculous. Castles Made of Sand. I wish this song was slowed down a bit more. It makes me wonder if this was sped up to fit on the LP. If you haven't heard Gil Evans plays the music of Hendrix, change that. I'm still on the hunt for this record. I love it, and I'm forever grateful for my history of jazz course in college for tipping me off to this. Gil's arrangement of Castles for the medley gives me everything I need because it's slowed down. Plus, I feel like Jimi would have loved it. He wanted to take his stuff in a more jazz direction. It's a shame we're rushing through this one because there is just some heart-wrenching imagery. She's So Fine sounds like a 60s Who cast-off. Its counterpart on Ladyland, Little Miss Strange, is far superior. Aside from featuring my man, it's just kinda here. It's not bad. Good job, Noel. I think of One Rainy Wish as the through line from May This Be Love to Rainy Day Dream Away / Still Raining, Still Dreaming. I love the recurring theme of Jimi connecting rain and dreams in his songs. Misty Blue, Lilac, Golden Rose. The more I listen to this, the more I see its beauty. It blossoms from the gentle wash and lilt of the verse into a thundering, soaring chorus and back down again. It's a wonderful balance of fortitude and grace. Then it sinks down into this motif where Mitch just goes unreasonably hard. Little Miss Lover once again rips. Mitch sets the tone with an R&B swagger and Noel sounds great great taking over the melody on his 8-string. There's a pretty obvious engineering goof on this song. There's a clip on the flange before the bass comes in. I didn't see this anywhere in my research, but I think Jimmy's voice was ran through the Leslie on this. I'm not crazy about the back half as a whole. It falls into a rhythm a little quicker than I'd hoped, but oh my god, I love the in the backing vocals. It's so much fun. And our grand finale, Bold as Love. With every tilt of the axis, a new civilization rises and falls, just the way this song rises and falls from verse to chorus. It's the nature of life. This song winds up into a solo we don't talk nearly enough about. Mitch wanted a big finish, and we got it. Flanging drums, glittering bright harpsichord on the surface, a fake out that soars into deranged euphoria with a jagged zap of a solo. What blows my mind about Axis is just how much the experience grew in such a short amount of time. They'd only been a band for all of a few weeks when they recorded Hey Joe. They were still learning how to be a band together. All three guys have grown leaps and bounds as musicians, impossibly so. Yes, even Jimmy. Axis is a picture of a band in flux, this living, breathing thing that takes a new shape every time you hear it. You hear a beautiful expansion on a rock-solid debut. Don't believe it could be improved upon? Think again. I also hear the seed of this sprawling, ambitious thing to come. It may, at times, be a little too big for its compact package, but Axis doesn't care. It has an addicting sense of play, a gorgeous, shimmering vitality within this album. Creation, stasis, destruction. That's Axis. Creation, stasis, destruction. That's the Jimi Hendrix experience. My personal favorites on this one are Spanish Castle Magic, Little Wing, If 6 Was 9, You Got Me Floating, One Rainy Wish, and Little Miss Lover. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it! That was our little Jimi Hendrix birthday celebration. That was Axis Bold as Love. What do you think of this album? What do you think of the experience? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love. And remember, no matter what some guy on the internet might tell you, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye!